The sun was setting. Not that it made much difference at 8 billion kilometres away. It was getting darker, but Mason's glow was brighter than the sun at this distance, illuminating the grey-white landscape of this unnamed chunk of ice. He had detected it 2 days ago, so he changed course and logged its discovery. Now that he was standing on its surface, smart cables gripping the ground to hold him down, he frowned. His senses were telling him that it was almost all water ice, making it worth about 250,000. He'd hoped for a hard mineral core, or at least an abundance of dust, something more than hydrogen and oxygen. It wasn't worth much, but it was worth something, although it had more immediate uses. Walking to its pole, Mason extended his tendrils into the soft, packed snow, digging it away and spraying webbing onto the tunnel. Within an hour, he'd excavated a chamber, only 20 or so cubic meters, but it was cosy. Once the work was done, he sprayed the exterior with webbing and placed a marker beacon on its surface, naming it Mason's Igloo. After he spent some time sitting on its exterior, scanning the sky for signs of other uncatalogued bodies, hopefully one with a little more value to it, the water of Mason's Igloo was useful as a fuel and drink for him, so a tendril pushed through the webbing and supped on the snow as he studied the night. When he was bored, he slipped into his virtual space, where he had a vast catalogue of movies, music and games, but the silence of the Kuiper Belt was always beautiful to him. It may have more than 1 billion inhabitants, but that doesn't even add up to 1 per million cubic kilometres. Mason's Igloo was essentially an island far from the shores of civilization, his little kingdom. Mason languished on his island for a week, searching for promising candidates, before he sighted one. He estimated it was around 200 metres across, more than 10 times the size of Mason's Igloo. So he logged its discovery and moved to the entrance of his cave. Bracing himself with his tendrils, he fired his plasma and began to push his new home toward the distant object. It was almost 1 million kilometres away, and it was going to take 8 days to get there. So once he was underway, he retreated to the cave, settling in for the ride. Each day, he spent 3 hours scanning. Much of the rest was sleeping, compressing time in his mind so that the journey would seem short, just a day of scanning. The object was dark grey. Mason kept his eyes on it as he decelerated the Igloo, carefully scanning it, his mind comparing spectral readings and measuring every feature of the slowly rotating object. It was icy for sure. Everything in the Kuiper Belt is icy, but the dark colour and size, that was hopeful. Mason's feet finally touched the surface, his smart cables shooting out to keep him anchored. With his tendrils and hands, he carefully lowered his Igloo to the surface, the ice of the bodies bonding together in the cold vacuum. Now that he was touching the surface, he could sense the interior, radar, sonar and lidar absorbing every detail of its surface and contents. Much of it was ice, water and ammonia ice, but some 15% of it was dust, mostly silicates, but there was carbon and nickel, making it worth more than 5 million. Not that that mattered out here. He would have to get it to Logos if he wanted to sell it. Mason began to melt and drink its ice, separating its contents into pouches in his body, soon filling with water and ammonia. He began to use the water to expand on his Igloo. It took days of work, expanding his Igloo to 100 metres in length, 40 metres wide. A cylinder to contain him and the best of the minerals. The exterior and interior were lined with webbing, so the ice would not melt inside the chamber. Filled with oxygen and nitrogen, the interior became breathable. It had been the first breaths Mason had taken in 2 years. It was sweet and clean, like a spring breeze, he imagined. He had to imagine, as he'd never visited a world with such seasons. Once the cylinder was finished, he used silicates to line it, even getting creative with landscaping. Mostly icy bulges with silicate coatings, but it felt like he imagined the earth to be, covered in lumps of rock, watery bits, some ice. It lacked any life beyond him, but some carbon and nickel soon made the shapes of flowers and trees. When he was on Pluto, decades ago, he'd seen their gardens filled with flowers and trees, so he shaped his own renditions. Soon he stepped back and smiled. The end of the ice caps was clear, allowing the night beyond to be seen, for what little light it provided. But hundreds of tons of ice and ammonia remained, too much for him to push alone. A search on the net was quickly fruitful, a schematic for a chemical engine. It was cheap to download and needed only water, silicates, and carbon. Some of his trees would have to go, along with some of the decorative rocks, but it would let him move this bulk. Building the engines took more than a week. Their large silicon exteriors and complex interiors would turn water into thrust, with the application of energy, something he had no shortage of. Once the engines were ready, Mason gathered the remaining water and ammonia ice onto the front cap of the cylinder. It would be the fuel for the journey. Finally loaded, he reached his tendrils through the icy cylinder to the engines, pumping electrical energy from him to them. The engines roared, the sound echoing through the chamber as the bulk of Mason's igloo began to move. Mason was not aiming for Logos. Instead, he was aiming for the laser bridge that runs from Logos to Makemake. It was only 3 million kilometers away, a journey of 26 days for these engines. Time enough to fashion some light sails. That would make the 100 million kilometer long journey to Logos a much shorter trip. For 6 days, Mason relaxed and enjoyed his little cylinder. The angle of the engines had started a gentle spin, just 2 meters a second, but the sense of gravity was nice, though it did necessitate the repair of a few carbon trees. In the early part of the 7th day, there was an EM flash beyond the cylinder somewhere, but it had damaged the beacon, though the ice had blocked any from reaching Mason. Not that such a pulse could harm him, but he would need to repair it, or he may cause a hazard around the laser bridge. Exiting the cylinder and climbing along its exterior, Mason could see the beacon. It was definitely not working, so he headed over and removed the access panel. As he removed it, there was an explosion, blowing him free of the cylinder and into the black. The sudden impact disoriented him, and it took a few moments for him to realize what had happened. Mason had never been blown up before. A few of his tendrils and a large portion of his cables were floating off in different directions, but Mason's igloo was not where it should be. It was more than 100 kilometers from him, and its engines were on, an impossibility when unmanned. There was no power without Mason. The igloo was slow. Mason's plasma could easily outpace it, so he began a burn, gaining on it. But as he got within a few kilometers, he could see that there was someone or something inside it, powering the engines and making off with his plane. Pushing harder, he approached within a kilometer when another explosion occurred. Still some distance away, but shards of icy debris were blasted outward. A wall of high-speed particles headed directly toward Mason. Changing course would let him avoid the debris, but it would make it impossible to catch up with his claim. He'd been injured already today. He couldn't risk it again. With a 90-degree correction, Mason took one last look at his ever-diminishing igloo, before plasma burn carried him safely away from the debris and his home. He didn't have much fuel left for making plasma, not to mention that he was injured, so Mason began to coat his injuries in webbing. while scanning for any unclaimed body. He needed fuel and food. He also messaged the Logos Mining Union, informing them of the piracy, though it was unlikely they would ever catch the culprit. It took a week of drifting through the deep before he detected an 18-metre object. It wasn't far off his path, so he carefully calculated an efficient route and burned nearly half his remaining plasma fuel. Hopefully there will be carbon and ammonia there, not just